She's 7 years old, and she's never heard a single word in her life. 7 years of silence. 7 years of doctors failing, specialists giving up, a father broken beyond hope. But tonight, everything changes. Because out of nowhere, a girl nobody expected, poor, small, unnoticed, does something no billionaire, no medical genius, no expert could ever imagine. What she pulls out isn't medical. It isn't simple. It's shocking. And it's about to change everything this family has ever known. She doesn't just give a voice back. She exposes a secret that was hidden for years. A secret so dangerous, so twisted, that the people you trust the most might be the ones trying to destroy her. And now, every second counts. Every choice could be the difference between freedom and disaster. She has 7 years of silence to make right, and the world is watching. Who is she? How did she do the impossible? And will they survive long enough to see the truth? Stay until the end, because what happens next will shock you. Before we dive into this story, tell us where in the world you're watching from and what time it is right now. Someone near you might be watching too. And don't forget to subscribe to support and appreciate the work we do on this channel. The billionaire stood frozen in the hallway, his chest rising and falling like someone drowning above air. And people said power could fix anything, but standing outside that hospital door for the 7th year in a row, Solomon Vance felt like the poorest man alive. Inside, his daughter sat on the cold examination table, small legs dangling, hands folded the same quiet way she always did. And her name was Leora, 7 years old, 7 years of silence, 7 years of specialists looking at Solomon with that terrible, polite face that meant they had failed again. But today felt different, too different, like the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. The doctor had barely touched Leora's ear when she jerked away in pain, something she had never done before, because Leora didn't react to touch, to sound, to music, to words, nothing at all. But today she flinched hard, and when the doctor leaned closer with his light, he whispered something no one in that room was prepared to hear. "There's something behind her ear," he said, his voice shaking slightly, something metallic, and the word hung in the air like a curse that nobody wanted to believe. Metallic in a child's ear, planted there like a seed of evil. And Solomon felt the ground tilt under him as his wife Alina grabbed his arm, so tightly her nails dug into his skin. Leora stared at the doctor's hands, her face blank, her eyes waiting, hoping, but she didn't know for what, didn't understand why everyone suddenly looked so afraid. Then the doctor used a pair of sterile tweezers and tried to pull at the edge of the tiny metal piece, and Leora screamed, a sound so raw and piercing that everyone in the room froze like statues. She had never screamed in her entire life, never made a single sound, and billion-dollar surgeons said her vocal cords were weak, her auditory nerves damaged, her brain not responsive enough. Yet here, she was shrieking in pain like her soul was tearing apart. The doctor stepped back, trembling, his face pale as moonlight, and he whispered words that would haunt Solomon forever. "This wasn't an accident. This was put here. Someone did this intentionally to your daughter." Solomon's world cracked open like an egg. Everything he thought he knew spilling out into chaos. But outside that hospital, curled up under a bus stop just 3 blocks away, a homeless black girl named Sky Morrow was about to walk into their lives carrying a gift no one could explain. And what she would pull out of Leora's ear would shock the entire world and change everything forever. Sky Morrow had learned to read people long before she learned to read words, and most 7-year-olds played with dolls or crayons. But Sky played with silence, listening to the parts of the world everyone else ignored, feeling things people didn't say, sensing fear before it showed on a face, knowing when someone was hurting even if they were smiling. It wasn't magic, and it wasn't training, it was survival, the kind of skill you develop when you're alone on cold streets with nobody to protect you except yourself. Tonight the wind was sharp, the kind that cut through thin clothes and thinner hope, and Sky hugged her oversized hoodie tighter around her tiny frame as she sat under the flickering bus stop light, her stomach growling, but she tried not to think about food because hunger was normal, cold was normal, being invisible was normal. But suddenly she wasn't alone anymore, and a man stumbled toward the bus stop, big and ragged, moving too fast like he was running from death itself, and Sky stiffened, ready to run if she had to, but then she saw what he was carrying in his arms. A little girl, her head resting on his shoulder, her eyes open but staring at nothing, not blinking, not seeing, and her hands kept tapping the man's jacket like she was trying to tell him something in a language nobody understood. Sky felt a strange pull in her chest, not physical, but deeper, like the girl was crying without tears, screaming without sound, drowning in silence while the world went on around her. The man laid the child down carefully on the bus stop bench, panic shaking his hands like leaves in a storm, and up close Sky noticed the expensive suit under his coat, the polished watch that cost more than most people earned in a year, the shoes that had never touched dirt until tonight. He didn't belong here, not at 11 at night, not panicking like his entire world was ending, and Sky knew something was horribly, terribly wrong. "Please," the man whispered to the unconscious air, "please breathe. Please be okay," his voice cracking under the weight of desperation that money couldn't fix. Sky stepped closer without knowing why, pulled forward by an invisible thread connecting her heart to this suffering child, and the girl gasped suddenly, gripping her ear hard, her face twisted in agony that had no voice. Sky saw it then, a shimmer behind the girl's ear, a tiny metallic gleam hidden under the skin like a secret that wanted to stay buried forever. Most kids would scream and run away from something so strange and terrifying, but Sky didn't because she understood pain in ways other children couldn't, knew what it felt like to suffer in silence, to need help that never came. She knelt beside the billionaire she didn't recognize and whispered softly, her voice calm like still water, "Mister, she's hurting inside. Not here," and she pointed her own chest, then tapped her ear gently, "Here, something's wrong here." He stared at her like she was speaking prophecy, like her words carried truth that doctors and specialists had missed for 7 years, and his voice shook when he asked, "How do you know that? How can you possibly know?" Sky didn't answer with words because words couldn't explain the gift she carried, the ability to feel what others couldn't see. So instead she reached toward Leora's ear, her small fingers steady and guided by something beyond reason, beyond logic, beyond anything science could measure. The moment she touched that hidden spot behind Leora's ear, the girl jerked violently, her back arching off the bench, and the air around them shifted like reality itself was bending. And Sky knew with absolute certainty that something shocking, something terrible, something that would change everything was about to happen, and there was no turning back now. Leora's scream shattered the night like glass exploding in slow motion. Not a quiet cry or a frightened yelp, but a scream so deep, so raw, so filled with 7 years of trapped pain that even the streetlights seemed to flicker in fear, and the sound ripped through the empty street like a warning bell nobody knew how to answer. The billionaire Solomon Vance stumbled backward, hitting the bus stop pole so hard the metal rang out, and Sky froze with her hand hovering near Leora's ear as the girl arched her back in agony, every muscle in her tiny body tightening like a string about to snap. For 7 years Leora had made no sound at all, 7 years of silent cries that nobody heard, 7 years of living in a world that couldn't reach her because she couldn't reach it, but now she was screaming like her life depended on it, like all those trapped years were pouring out in one terrible moment. "Leora," Solomon's voice cracked like breaking wood. "Baby, I'm here. I'm right here." But his words felt useless against the wall of her pain, and Sky didn't move even though every instinct told her to pull away, because her eyes were fixed on the tiny metallic glint behind Leora's ear, the piece no doctor had noticed, no machine had detected, no amount of billionaire money had ever found. Sky swallowed hard and said in a voice steadier than she felt, "Sir, she's not screaming because of me. She's screaming because someone hurt her. Someone put that thing inside her, and it's been hurting her this whole time." Solomon's breath caught in his throat like a fish pulled from water, and before he could respond, Leora's small hand shot out with surprising strength, grabbing Sky's wrist and pulling it toward the back of her ear, as if begging her to finish what she started, to end the nightmare that had stolen her voice for so long. Solomon stared in disbelief and whispered, "She trusts you. How does she trust you when she's never trusted anyone?" And Sky shook her head slowly, her heart pounding against her ribs like a drum, and said, "No, sir, she doesn't trust me. She feels me. She knows I understand her pain." That sentence hit Solomon with the weight of a falling mountain, because the little girl who never reacted to touch, who never connected with anyone, who never responded to love or comfort, was now clinging to a homeless child she had just met like Sky was her only hope in the entire world. If you believe that the deepest human connections are not bought, but earned through pure empathy, pause and take 5 seconds to comment. I believe in Sky to show your support for this incredible act of courage. Sky leaned in again, her heart racing so fast she could hear it in her ears, and pressed her thumb gently against the edge of the metallic piece, and Leora gasped, her pupils widening until they looked like black moons, and a shock rippled through her body like electricity running through water. Then the metal shifted, not like a medical implant or a screw, but like something alive, something that wasn't supposed to be inside a child's body, something evil and deliberate and wrong. Sky whispered with absolute certainty, "It's loose now. She wants it out. She's been wanting it out for 7 years," and Solomon's voice trembled as he said, "Then take it out, please. If you can help her do it, I'll give you anything, everything I have." Sky shook her head firmly and said, "Don't promise me anything, mister. Just hold her still and pray this works." And right as she pinched the metal edge between her small fingers, a shadow moved at the corner of her vision. Heavy footsteps pounding the pavement, fast and getting faster, and a giant figure came sprinting toward them out of the darkness. Sky's eyes snapped up, and her voice cut through the night like a blade. "Sir, someone's coming. Someone who doesn't want us to do this." The shadow hit the edge of the bus stop just as Sky's fingers brushed the metal, and a man tall, broad, and terrifying skidded to a stop with his eyes wide and wild, and locked on Leora, like she was something he had lost and desperately needed back. Fear gripped Solomon's chest like icy chains because he recognized the shape instantly, even in the dim light. It was Marcus Drayton, his head of security, the man he paid to protect his family, running toward them as if the world itself had caught fire and everything was about to burn. "What are you doing?" Marcus bellowed, his voice booming over the empty street like thunder rolling across a dark sky. And Sky froze, but she didn't flinch, didn't step back, because she felt the tension crackling in the air like lightning about to strike, felt it in Leora's grip on her wrist, felt it in Solomon's panic, and she knew with absolute certainty that there was more at play here than anyone realized. "Step back," Solomon shouted with a force that surprised even himself, holding Leora tight against his chest. "She's helping her. She can fix this. Don't you dare interfere." And Marcus hesitated as confusion and fury twisted his face into something ugly and desperate. "Fix," Marcus said slowly like he was tasting poison. "Do you know what you're doing, girl? Do you have any idea what that thing is?" And his eyes flicked to the metallic glint behind Leora's ear and then snapped back to Sky with an expression she couldn't read, something between fear and warning and terrible knowledge. Sky swallowed hard, but she didn't explain because words would slow the moment, would distract from the delicate work her fingers had to do, and time was collapsing around them like a building about to fall, because the metal wasn't just a piece of machinery. It was a secret, a trap, something someone had put there on purpose to control a little girl's entire life. Leora whimpered and shook, but she kept trusting, her small hand clutching Sky's wrist so tightly it hurt, almost as if she were saying with her grip what her voice couldn't yet speak. "Don't fail me now. Please don't leave me trapped in silence forever." Solomon stepped forward and placed himself between Marcus and Sky like a wall of flesh and desperation, his voice raw and trembling, yet somehow firm, when he said, "She's the only one who can do this. Step back now, Marcus." That's an order, and for the first time in years Marcus looked uncertain, as if he were realizing that money and security and all his training meant absolutely nothing here, because a child's pain outweighed everything else in the universe. Sky took a deep breath that felt like swallowing fire, her tiny fingers gripping the edge of the metal with a steadiness that didn't match her racing heart, and she could feel it shift slightly under her touch like it was alive and fighting back, resisting removal, because it had secrets to keep and control to maintain. Then, with one quick, precise movement, she applied pressure, and the metal moved. Just a fraction of an inch, but enough, and a silent shockwave ran through Leora's body, making her eyes widen until her pupils dilated like she was seeing a new world opening before her. Her mouth quivered and trembled, and then just a hint, just a tiny whisper of sound escaped her lips, the first real sound she had made in 7 long years of imprisoned silence. And everyone, Solomon and Marcus and Sky, froze completely because they all knew in their bones that this was only the beginning, that whatever was about to happen next would change everything forever, and there would be no going back to the way things were before this night. The sound that slipped from Leora's lips was tiny, almost a whisper carried on the cold night wind. But it was there, real and alive and impossible. And the word she spoke was help, just that one syllable stretched thin like a thread connecting her to a world she had never been able to reach before. Sky froze with her fingers still touching the metal behind Leora's ear, and Solomon gasped so hard he had to grip the back of the bus stop bench as if it could anchor him to reality and keep him from floating away into disbelief. Marcus, still tense and towering like a statue carved from stone, stared as though the world had tilted off its axis and gravity had stopped working. Because 7 years, 7 impossibly long years of silence, and in one small trembling word everything they thought they knew had shattered like glass under a hammer. Leora's lips quivered as she tried to form another syllable, her whole face contorting with effort like she was lifting a weight no child should ever have to carry, and tears streaked down her cheeks, mixing relief and fear and wonder into something so pure it hurt to watch. Sky held her hand steady, even though her own heart was racing like a wild horse, and she whispered softly, "It's okay, baby. You can do it. Take your time. Your voice is coming back to you now." And her words carried a calm that no adult in that street could replicate, because Sky understood what it meant to be trapped, to be voiceless, to need someone to believe in you when the whole world had given up. Solomon's knees buckled under the weight of emotion, and he sank to the cold ground beside them, burying his face in his hands as 7 years of guilt and helplessness came pouring out of him like a dam breaking. "My baby," he sobbed, his voice cracking and breaking into pieces. "My baby can hear. She can speak. Oh God, she can speak." And the joy mixed with the horror of knowing that someone had stolen this from her on purpose, had planted that evil device in her head to keep her silent and powerless. Marcus, trained to respond to every kind of emergency imaginable, didn't move at all. He only watched stunned and helpless as the impossible unfolded right in front of his eyes, because security and money and authority were completely irrelevant now, useless against the miracle happening on a dirty bus stop bench in the middle of the night. A homeless girl had just achieved what billion-dollar medicine and world-famous specialists could not, and the weight of that truth hung in the air like smoke you couldn't wave away. And yet even in this moment of breakthrough, Sky felt it, that creeping sensation crawling up her spine like spiders, the feeling that something wasn't right, that the metal chip behind Leora's ear hadn't been ordinary at all. It had been placed there intentionally with a purpose that went deeper than anyone yet understood, darker than simple cruelty. Sky's small fingers hovered over the edge of the device again, hesitant now, because she could sense it shifting and hiding like it was almost alive, like it had one more secret to reveal before it would let go. Leora's new voice trembled as she tried another word, and this time the name that slipped out was Sky, fragile and magical and perfect, because Leora had spoken her savior's name and made it real. The street seemed to hold its breath, and the night air went completely still, but the sense of relief didn't last because far across the darkened block, hidden in the shadows between streetlights, a figure watched them in silence, patient and calculating, waiting for exactly the right moment to strike. And Sky knew it instinctively the way prey knows when a predator is near. She knew with every fiber of her being that this moment of hope and healing was far from over, that the real danger was just beginning to show its face. The first word had broken the silence, but hadn't broken the danger, and Sky's instinct screamed at her like alarm bells ringing in her head, warning her that something or someone was moving in the shadows with purpose and malice. Every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps. Every distant car engine felt like a threat approaching, and she glanced up to see across the empty street a silhouette lingering just beyond the streetlight's weak glow, not approaching yet, but radiating menace like heat waves rising from hot pavement. Sky's heart hammered against her ribs like it was trying to escape, but she didn't flinch or panic. Not now, when Leora's tiny hand still clung to hers with desperate trust. Not when they had come so far and fought so hard for this fragile moment of freedom. "Stay behind me," Sky whispered as she pressed herself closer to the little girl, positioning her body like a shield between Leora and whatever darkness was creeping toward them. And Leora's eyes were wide and shimmering with tears, but there was trust there, precious and unbreakable. The kind of trust Sky knew she could never betray, no matter what happened next. Solomon staggered to his feet with his expensive suit now wrinkled and dirty from kneeling on the ground, his eyes darting frantically between the figure in the dark and his daughter. And his voice was barely steady when he said, "Who's out there? Who would do this to us? Marcus, move, and check it now." Marcus advanced cautiously toward the shadow, but even this trained security expert faltered because something about the darkness felt wrong. Not just wrong, but calculated and deliberate, like every shadow had been positioned on purpose, like the night itself was working against them. Sky took a deep breath and tried to slow her racing thoughts because she didn't need weapons or authority or size. She had something far stronger, which was intuition, the ability to feel danger like a pulse running through the night, almost synchronized with Leora's rapid breathing and terrified heartbeat. Then the figure moved, closer now, deliberate and silent like a predator that had been watching and learning and waiting for exactly this moment of vulnerability. Leora's small hand gripped Sky's, so tightly her nails pressed into skin hard enough to leave marks, and her tiny voice whispered with newfound clarity, "It's coming, Sky, it's coming for us." And those words pierced through the night like a bell ringing out a warning. Sky didn't flinch even though fear tried to freeze her in place. Instead, she leaned slightly toward Leora and whispered back with a calmness she didn't feel, "I got you, baby. Just hold on a little longer. We're going to get through this together, I promise." The figure stepped fully into the weak circle of light cast by the street lamp. And when Solomon saw who it was, his entire body went rigid and his face drained of all color like someone had opened a tap and let his blood run out. Not a stranger, not some random criminal from the dark streets, but someone familiar, someone who should have protected Leora with their life, someone whose betrayal hit harder than any physical blow ever could. The realization crashed over everyone standing in that street with the weight of a sledgehammer, and betrayal took human form right there under the flickering streetlight, real and terrible and undeniable. This shocking moment reminds us that evil often hides in plain sight. Join our community dedicated to uncovering hidden truths. Smash that subscribe button and tell us in the comments who you think the real villain behind this conspiracy is. As the figure raised one hand in a gesture that could have been greeting or threat, the metallic glint behind Leora's ear caught the weak light, and Sky's stomach twisted into knots because she understood now that this wasn't just about helping a deaf girl hear again. This was about survival, about fighting for life itself against people who had planned and schemed and hurt an innocent child for their own twisted purposes. And the first real battle for Leora's life and the terrible secret behind that chip had finally begun right here on this cold street under an indifferent moon. The figure stepped fully into the dim light, and the world seemed to tilt sideways on its axis, because it was Nadia, the family's trusted nanny, the woman who had fed Leora every meal, sung her lullabies when nightmares came, kissed her forehead every single night before bed. The woman Solomon and Alina had praised and trusted and even loved like family. And now she was the threat, standing there with eyes that had gone hard and cold and calculating, eyes that didn't flinch or look away with shame, but instead stared at them with the confidence of someone who believed they held all the power. She didn't speak at first, just stood there while that small metallic object glinted behind Leora's ear, catching every bit of streetlight and reflecting back a story of betrayal so deep it made the night air feel thick and poisonous. Sky stiffened because she could feel the wrongness radiating from Nadia like heat from a fire. Not just an accident or negligence, but something deliberate and evil, something wrapped in years of fake smiles and false kindness. Solomon stumbled forward like a man who had been punched in the gut, his voice breaking into jagged pieces when he said, "Nadia, How could you? How could you do this? You were supposed to protect her. We trusted you with our daughter's life. Nadia's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, almost imperceptible but there, and when she finally spoke her voice was soft and dangerous like a knife wrapped in silk. Protect her, she said slowly. You think I was protecting her? No, Solomon. I was controlling her, and you have no idea how easy it was. 7 years of silence, 7 years of no complaints, no interference, no problems at all. Leora's eyes widened until they looked like they might swallow her whole face, and the first words she had ever spoken, the trust she had just learned to give, now felt like weapons being used against her, and she trembled in Sky's arms with her tiny hands clutching the homeless girl's hoodie like it was the only solid thing left in a world that had just turned to quicksand. Sky's jaw tightened, and her small body went rigid with protective fury, because she didn't hesitate for even a second. Her fingers moved instinctively toward the metallic piece still partially embedded behind Leora's ear, and every instinct screamed urgency, screamed that this chip was the key to everything. Remove it and the power Nadia wielded would crumble into dust. Leave it and Leora remained trapped in a prison made of silence and control. Marcus, towering and tense like a coiled spring, stepped forward with his voice like iron when he commanded stay back. But even he couldn't hide the doubt creeping into his mind like poison, couldn't process how someone so familiar and trusted could transform into the enemy standing before them. The street seemed to close in around them. The wind howled, carrying with it the weight of betrayal and fear and desperate urgency, and every shadow felt alive and threatening. Sky's small hands steadied themselves over the chip with a determination that made her seem older than her 7 years, and Leora's lips trembled as she prepared to speak again, to use her newly freed voice to fight back against the woman who had stolen so much from her. Then Nadia lunged, and her movement was fast and calculated and precise, every motion showing training that no ordinary nanny should possess, and Sky's heart pounded like thunder, but she didn't flinch because this was the moment that would decide everything. This was the confrontation that would determine whether Leora lived free or died trapped. And what Sky would do next would shock everyone watching, because a homeless 7-year-old girl was about to face down an enemy that had spent years planning this evil. And the real battle for truth and freedom had finally exploded into the open under a cold, uncaring sky. The tension is unbearable. Are you on the edge of your seat? Don't let the algorithm stop the fight for Leora's voice. Give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel right now too. Signal you demand the truth. Nadia lunged with the speed of a striking snake, but Sky was faster, her small hands guided by something beyond reason or training, gripping the edge of the metallic piece behind Leora's ear with fingers that trembled but didn't falter. Leora gasped, and her first precious words caught halfway between fear and relief as Sky could feel the tiny girl trembling like a leaf in a storm. But she couldn't stop now, couldn't hesitate even for a second, because everything depended on removing that evil device before Nadia could stop them. Solomon shouted, "Sky, watch out," his voice desperate and raw. But his words were swallowed by the chaos erupting around them as Marcus moved instinctively to intercept Nadia, his massive body trying to block her path, but she twisted like a shadow made flesh, agile and lethal in ways no one had ever expected from a gentle nanny who baked cookies and read bedtime stories. Sky's mind raced through 1,000 thoughts in a single second. 7 years of silence, 7 years of helplessness, 7 years of a little girl trapped in darkness. And now the very woman entrusted with Leora's life and safety was trying to destroy her completely, trying to keep her imprisoned forever. Leora whimpered and gripped Sky's hoodie, so tightly the fabric stretched and tore slightly. And she murmured something that Sky couldn't fully hear yet, but didn't need to, because the meaning was clear in the desperate way those small fingers clung to hope. Sky's fingers found the edge of the chip again, and it shifted slightly under her touch, almost ready to come free. And she could feel it loosening like a tooth about to fall out, feel the moment of liberation approaching like dawn breaking over a dark horizon. Nadia reached forward with her polished nails, grazing Sky's arm hard enough to leave red marks on the skin. and the wind carried a hiss that could have been breath or fury or both, and the streetlight above them flickered like it was struggling to witness what was happening below. For a moment, time itself seemed to stretch and bend, every second lasting an eternity, while Sky made the choice between safety and courage, between running away and fighting for what was right. "Let go," Solomon yelled as he stepped forward, trying to put himself between his daughter and danger. But Sky didn't let go because she had the one thing Nadia couldn't touch or understand or defeat, which was intuition and empathy and a connection to Leora that went deeper than trust, deeper than logic, deeper than anything that could be explained with words. With a sudden pull that was both precise and deliberate, Sky dislodged the metallic piece, and it popped free with a sound like a cork leaving a bottle, glinting in the weak light as it came away from Leora's skin, and the little girl's eyes widened in shock and wonder as the first clear, loud sound escaped her lips in 7 impossibly long years. "Ah!" Leora cried out, and the sound was pure and unfiltered and beautiful. The sound of a voice finally set free from its prison, and Nadia stumbled backward with her eyes wide in disbelief and fury, because she hadn't expected this, hadn't planned for a homeless girl to outsmart her carefully laid plans. Sky held the chip aloft in her small hand, trembling slightly from adrenaline and fear, but also with the weight of victory. And Leora's gaze met hers with eyes full of tears and wonder and gratitude that no words could ever properly express. Then, just as the street seemed to exhale in relief, just as everyone thought the worst might be over, a siren wailed in the distance, cutting through the night like a blade, and Sky's blood ran cold because someone was coming, someone who didn't just want the chip, someone who wanted Leora and Sky and everything they now held in their shaking hands. And the night wasn't over, not even close, because what happened next would change absolutely everything forever. The wail of the siren cut through the night like a knife slicing through fabric, sharp and sudden and terrifying, and Sky's pulse raced so fast she thought her heart might explode right out of her chest. Every nerve in her body screamed that the danger was far from over, that removing the chip had only opened the first door in a maze of threats they couldn't yet see. And Leora clutched her hand tightly with small fingers pressing into Sky's skin as if holding on to life itself, while the metallic chip, now safely in Sky's palm, glinted under the flickering streetlight like a fragile key to secrets no one else had understood. Solomon's voice shook with panic when he said, "It's the police. They're coming. They'll take her away if they see the chip, or worse, they'll think she's in danger and separate us." And his words tumbled out fast and desperate, because after 7 years of fighting for his daughter, he couldn't bear the thought of losing her now. Sky's mind raced through possibilities and escape routes, because she had seconds, literally just seconds to act before the approaching blue and red lights illuminated the entire street and exposed them to anyone watching. And her intuition screamed at her that someone had set a trap, that the chip had been placed on purpose by people who wanted Leora powerless and controllable and silent forever. Marcus moved forward with his voice booming. "Everyone stay calm. Just step back and let's assess the situation." But Sky didn't listen because calm wasn't going to save them. Action was, and she crouched low beside Leora and whispered with her mouth close to the girl's ear, "You can do this, baby. Trust me just a little longer. We're going to survive this together." Leora's eyes widened, and her first words of the night still echoed in the empty street like bells that couldn't be unrung. And she whispered back, Sky, with a voice so small and fragile it nearly broke Sky's heart into 1,000 pieces. "Yes, I'm here," Sky replied with a steadiness she pulled from some deep place inside herself despite the chaos swirling around them. And she turned to scan every shadow and every corner because movement flickered across the alley behind them. Someone waiting and watching and being patient and calculating their next move. Nadia, now furious and exposed like a wild animal cornered, hissed through clenched teeth, "You think this changes anything? You stupid little girl. The truth will come out, and you have no idea what's coming for you. What they'll do when they find out you interfered." Sky's small hands clenched the chip tighter until the metal edges pressed in her palm hard enough to hurt, and the air felt thick and suffocating like trying to breathe underwater. And every step of the approaching siren brought the night closer to explosion. closer to a moment where everything could shatter beyond repair. Then from the darkness at the edge of the alley, a second figure emerged, taller and faster and more menacing than Nadia had ever been, moving with purpose that made Sky's heart skip several beats. Sky's stomach dropped, and Solomon's face drained of all color until he looked like a ghost standing in his own life. And Leora, finally hearing fully for the first time in 7 years, realized the true depth of danger surrounding them. And her wide eyes locked on Sky's with an expression that asked without words, "Are we going to make it through this?" Sky whispered almost under her breath, so quietly only Leora could hear, "We have to move right now. No hesitation, no second thoughts. Just run." And before anyone could react or protest, or even understand what was happening, the figure lunged from the shadows with arms reaching and time slowed to an agonizing crawl, and the night held its breath because everything about Leora's life, the billionaire family's secrets, the homeless girl's courage, and the hidden chip's terrible purpose was about to explode into absolute chaos that no one could control. The shadow hit with the force of a hurricane, ripping through everything in its path, and Sky barely had time to react before the figure, a tall, imposing man cloaked in black like death itself, swept forward with his arms aimed straight for the chip in her hand, like it was the only thing in the world that mattered. Leora screamed, and this time it was a pure, piercing sound that ripped through the night with such force it seemed to shake the very air around them. And it was the first time she had fully used her voice in 7 years, and now it became a weapon, a signal of danger that no one could ignore or pretend didn't exist. "Stay behind me," Sky yelled with instinct and courage overriding the terror, trying to freeze her in place. And she positioned herself between Leora and the intruder with her tiny fingers still gripping the metallic piece, as if her life depended on it, which it absolutely did, because that chip was evidence, proof of the evil that had been done to an innocent child. Solomon lunged forward, finally snapping into action after seconds of shock paralyzed him. And he shouted, "Marcus, stop him. Do something," but the shadow was impossibly fast, faster than any ordinary man should be, and he knocked Solomon back with a brutal sweep of his arm that sent the billionaire crashing into a lamppost. Metal screeched, and paint chipped, and Solomon's body hit the pavement with a thud that made everyone flinch, and the sound echoed through the empty street like a warning of what could happen to anyone who got in this man's way. Sky's breath caught in her throat, and Leora shrank back, clutching her tightly, with eyes wide with the kind of terror that comes from seeing violence up close for the first time. But Sky's mind was racing because she had to protect Leora, had to protect the chip, had to protect the fragile hope of 7 years of silence finally breaking into sound and freedom. The man's eyes glinted under the streetlight, cold and merciless, and calculating like he had done this kind of thing 100 times before, and his voice was low and dangerous when he snarl-handed over, "Girl, that child doesn't belong to you. She never did, and she never will." Sky's heart pounded so hard she could feel in her fingertips and her toes and every part of her body, and she could feel Leora's fear seeping in her own chest like water, soaking through cloth, could feel the weight of responsibility crushing her small shoulders until she thought they might break. And yet she didn't move, didn't hesitate, didn't give even an inch of ground, because she had the one thing he didn't, which was the bond with Leora, a connection forged in trust and pain and empathy that no amount of violence could break. With a sudden surge of movement, Sky ducked under his reaching hands, spinning around to shield Leora completely with her own body, and the chip slipped slightly from her grasp and clinked against her palm, and time seemed to stretch like taffy being pulled, every second becoming a heartbeat of life or death hanging in perfect balance. And in that moment, the man froze with something in the chip, something Sky could sense though she didn't understand it fully, warning him or stopping him or making him reconsider, and his face tightened while his eyes narrowed into slits filled with calculation and fury. Sky whispered to Leora with her voice barely audible over the sound of her own racing heartbeat, "Hold on, baby. This isn't over yet. We're not done fighting." And the night held its breath one more time, because what happened next would decide who survived and who didn't, who got to tell their story, and who would be silenced forever. And the answer was coming fast like a train barreling down tracks with no brakes, and no way to stop what had already been set in motion. Sky grabbed Leora's hand and ran, and the asphalt beneath their feet felt like it was melting with each desperate step they took as the sirens grew louder and the pounding of the strangers' boots behind them echoed like drums announcing the end of the world. Every instinct screamed that if they slowed down even for a second they were done, finished, dead, or worse. And Sky yelled, "Keep moving," with her voice sharp and cutting through the night air like a whip cracking. Leora's small legs struggled to keep pace, but the child's determination, newly ignited by sound and trust and the fierce will to survive, pushed her forward faster than she had ever moved in her entire 7 years of silent existence. "Sky, don't let them," Leora shouted, and her first words spoken in panic tumbled out raw and real and desperate. And those words gave Sky even more strength because this little girl was fighting now, not just being rescued but actively choosing to survive. Solomon struggled to keep up behind them, dragging Marcus with him, but their size was a liability on these narrow streets where Sky's agility and speed gave her the advantage, because being small and quick mattered more than being big and strong when death was chasing you through shadows. The wind whipped at their faces, carrying the smell of rain and city grime mixed with exhaust and garbage, and streetlights flickered like warning signals telling them danger was everywhere, and every corner they turned could hide another threat waiting to grab them. Behind them, the shadow continued to close the distance with each step deliberate and powerful, and Sky could feel him getting closer, could almost feel his breath on the back of her neck, even though he was still yards away, because fear has a way of making dangers feel closer than they really are. Every time he lunged forward, Sky twisted and ducked and pulled Leora with movements that seemed impossible for someone so young and small, protecting the girl with every ounce of her being, with every survival instinct she had learned living alone on cruel streets. Then Leora stumbled hard, and a sharp cry tore from her throat, and Sky spun around so fast her shoes squeaked on the pavement, catching the child before she could fall and scrape her knees on the rough ground. Their eyes met in that moment, both pairs wide with fear, but also brimming with a new kind of courage that neither of them had known they possessed until this very night. And Sky whispered with fierce intensity, "You can do this, baby. I've got you. I promise I've always got you." Something inside Leora shifted right then like a lock clicking open, and her panic became determination. Her fear transformed into focus, and she shouted louder than she had ever spoken before. "Go, Sky, run faster." Her voice cutting through the night like a flare lighting up the darkness with defiance that no one could ignore. The sound made their pursuer falter for just a fraction of a second, hesitation flashing across his eyes like lightning. And that tiny moment was just long enough for Sky to spot a narrow alley ahead, barely wide enough for their small bodies, but too tight for the massive man chasing them. It was a path that could either save their lives or lead them straight into the next trap, a gamble with death as the stakes. And the darkness of that alley waited like an open mouth ready to swallow them whole, and Sky knew with terrible certainty that they had only seconds to decide whether to risk it or find another way, and those seconds were ticking away faster than her racing heartbeat. The alley yawned before them like the mouth of a beast, narrow and dark, and almost impossibly long, stretching into shadows so thick they looked solid enough to touch. And Sky's heart pounded like a drum in her chest because every instinct screamed this could be a trap, a dead end, a place where they would be cornered with nowhere left to run. But it was the only chance they had, the only possible escape from the monster chasing them through the night. And Sky made her decision in the space between one heartbeat and the next. "Stay close," she whispered while gripping Leora's hand with a strength that belied her small frame. And Leora nodded with her eyes wide and glistening with tears and determination mixed together like oil and water that refused to separate. She had spoken more in the past hour than in 7 years of forced silence, and every word carried the weight of survival, the heaviness of a life finally being lived instead of just endured. Behind them, the shadow advanced with steps that were deliberate and echoing off the brick walls like a countdown to their doom. And each footfall was a reminder of how close death could be, how thin the line was between living and dying on these cold streets. As they ran deeper into the alley, Sky felt the chip in her palm grow warmer, pulsing almost like it had a heartbeat of its own, a rhythm that matched Leora's racing pulse. And she didn't understand why, but she knew it was connected to the girl in ways no one could imagine, in ways that went beyond technology into something almost mystical. Whoever had put that device in Leora's head wasn't just controlling her hearing. They were controlling her destiny, her future, her very existence, and Sky would die before she let them take that control back. Halfway down, the alley debris littered the ground, broken crates and garbage bags and shattered glass that caught the faint moonlight, and Sky leapt over a broken crate while pulling Leora with her. "Jump!" she shouted, and Leora's small legs moved as if powered by adrenaline and newfound courage, clearing the obstacle like a tiny gazelle fleeing from a lion. Suddenly, the shadow lunged forward and knocked a dumpster over with a strength that seemed superhuman, and the clanging crash echoed through the alley like thunder in a metal canyon. And Sky felt Leora slip, her hand starting to slide from Sky's grip. Time slowed to an agonizing crawl, and Sky reached out with her fingers brushing Leora's, barely maintaining contact, and the shadow's gloved hand almost caught them both, so close Sky could smell the leather and sweat. "Not today," Sky hissed through clenched teeth, yanking Leora back toward her with a strength she didn't know she had, and the metallic chip in her palm seemed to vibrate like it was sending a signal or a warning, though she couldn't tell which and didn't have time to figure it out. The alley opened into what Sky's heart sank to see, a dead end, walls rising on all sides, dripping with water and covered in shadows that moved like living things, and behind them their pursuers' steps grew louder and more confident because he knew he had them trapped. Sky's chest heaved with each breath burning her lungs, and Leora's hands were icy cold and trembling, but still clutching hers with trust that felt like both a gift and a terrible responsibility. And then Sky saw it, a ladder leading up to a fire escape, a way to climb higher and escape, but it was a leap that could kill them if they miscalculated even slightly, if their hands slipped or their courage failed. Sky swallowed hard and whispered to Leora, "We jump or we fight. Those are our only choices now," and the night waited with its breath held to see which path they would choose, and what they decided next would change everything forever. Sky's eyes locked on the fire escape ladder hanging above them, rusted and narrow, and swaying slightly in the cold wind like it was daring them to try. And it was their only chance because behind them the shadows' steps grew louder and closer and more menacing with every passing second. "Sky," Leora's voice trembled, but there was something new in it, something tiny but determined that hadn't existed before tonight, and Sky knew that this little girl was fighting alongside her now instead of just being rescued. "We jump together," Sky said while tightening her grip on Leora's hand, her voice calm and unwavering even though her chest raced and her heart threatened to burst through her ribs like a wild animal trying to escape a cage. Solomon and Marcus arrived at the dead end with their faces twisted in terror, and Solomon shouted, "Sky, are you insane? You can't jump from there. You'll both die." But Sky didn't have time for his fear or his doubt because she had no choice left in the world. 7 years of silence, a child's stolen life, and a secret that could destroy everything. The risk was worth it. The danger was worth it. Living was worth dying for if it came to that. "I've got her," Sky said firmly, and then without waiting for permission or approval, she hauled Leora onto her back, feeling the girl's arms wrap around her neck and her legs lock around her waist, holding on with everything she had. Sky took a deep breath that filled her lungs with cold night air and courage. Then she ran, taking quick steps while counting her heartbeat. 1, 2, 3, 4, and she yelled, "Now," just as her feet left the ground and they leapt into empty air. Time stretched and bent and nearly broke as the world seemed to pause. The city lights blurred into streaks of color. The wind whipped past them like invisible hands trying to pull them down, and every muscle in Sky's small body strained against gravity and fear and the possibility of failure. Leora clutched Sky as if her life depended on her, which it absolutely did, her small fingers digging into Sky's shoulders hard enough to leave bruises, and Sky could hear the girl's rapid breathing in her ear, feel the warmth of her tears on her neck. They hit the ladder with a jolt that rattled Sky's bones and knocked the air from her lungs, and metal groaned under their combined weight like it might give way any second and send them plummeting to the concrete below. Sky's arms shook violently as she gripped the rusty rungs that cut into her palms, and Leora clung to her back like a baby monkey clinging to its mother in a storm. The shadow reached the end of the alley and froze for just a split second as he watched them ascending, probably calculating whether he could make the same jump or if he needed to find another way up. Marcus and Solomon followed more cautiously, their adult weight making the ladder groan even louder, but the moment belonged to Sky and Leora, belonged to courage overcoming size and youth defeating experience. Finally, they reached the roof and collapsed onto the tar paper surface, panting with hearts pounding and muscles trembling, and the city sprawled below them like a glittering sea of lights that suddenly looked beautiful instead of threatening. For one heartbeat, it felt like victory, like they had actually won something important, but Sky knew better because the chip in her palm vibrated slightly, warm and insistent like it was trying to tell her something she couldn't yet understand. As a dark figure emerged from the alley below, with eyes glinting with malice and determination, Sky realized with a sinking feeling in her stomach that the fight wasn't over, not by a long shot, not even close, because the night had more secrets to reveal, and what Sky would uncover next would shock everyone who thought they knew the truth. The cold night wind whipped around Sky and Leora as they crouched on the rooftop with hearts hammering and breaths ragged, and below them the shadow from the alley paused, watching and waiting like a predator, sizing up prey before the final strike. Sky held Leora close and whispered, "It's okay, baby. We're not done yet." Not by far, her tiny fingers clutching the metallic chip that now pulsed faintly as if it had a life of its own, and every instinct screamed danger, because whoever had put that chip in Leora had orchestrated this entire nightmare from the very beginning. Solomon arrived on the roof with his chest heaving and his voice shaky when he said, "Sky, what do we do now? We can't stay here forever. They'll find another way up, and we'll be trapped with nowhere left to run." Sky shook her head firmly, because staying put wasn't an option, but neither was running blindly without understanding what they were fighting against. "We need to find out who's behind this," she said with a certainty that surprised even herself. "The chip is the key to everything. We can't let it fall into their hands, or Leora will never be free." Below them the shadow moved again, and a glint of metal caught the moonlight, and Sky realized with growing horror that it wasn't just a man chasing them. It was someone trained and ruthless, and willing to do whatever it took to get that chip back. Someone who saw Leora not as a child, but as property to be controlled. Nadia had been one part of it, one layer of the conspiracy, but this new figure was bigger and more dangerous, part of something that went deeper than anyone had imagined. Sky's eyes narrowed as she tried to think 3 steps ahead like she always did when surviving on the streets, and Leora peeked over her shoulder trembling but determined, and whispered, "Sky, I'm scared," with her newly freed voice, so small and fragile it nearly broke Sky's heart. "I know, baby," Sky replied while forcing a reassuring smile on her face, "but fear doesn't decide who wins. We do. We choose whether to give up or keep fighting, and I say we fight." Then, without any warning at all, the figure leapt from the ground with terrifying speed that seemed impossible for a normal human being, vaulting up and landing on the rooftop with a crash that shook the tiles and sent some of them sliding off the edge to shatter on the street below. Sky barely had time to react as Leora screamed and clutched her tighter, and the stranger's face came into view under the moonlight, and what Sky saw made her blood run cold as ice. It wasn't just any man, it was a doctor from the Vance family's medical team, someone they had trusted for years, someone who should have saved Leora instead of endangering her, someone whose betrayal cut deeper than any knife ever could. Sky's mind reeled as the realization hit her like a physical blow. The chip wasn't just a device to control hearing, it was a weapon of manipulation and greed, hidden and protected by the very people who were supposed to care for Leora most. The doctor lunged forward with his arms outstretched and his face twisted in desperation, and Sky moved instinctively to shield Leora, ready to fight with every ounce of strength her small body could muster, even though she knew she was outmatched in size and power. And in that instant, everything teetered on the edge of a knife blade, balance between life and death, between truth and lies, between freedom and eternal captivity, and one wrong move or one slip of her foot would mean their lives, and the secret of the chip would be lost forever in a tragedy that nobody would ever fully understand. Sky felt the metallic chip pulse in her palm, warm and insistent, and almost alive, like it had its own heartbeat that synchronized with Leora's racing pulse. And the air on the rooftop crackled with tension, so thick it felt like trying to breathe underwater. Leora clung to her back with small hands trembling, but her eyes, wide and tearful and shining with courage, spoke volumes about how much she had changed in just one night, how finding her voice had also helped her find her strength. The doctor advanced slowly with his face twisted in rage and desperation, and his voice was low but dangerous when he growled, "You don't understand anything. That chip controls more than just hearing. It controls potential. It was designed to suppress it until the time was right, because the world isn't ready for what she could become." Sky froze as the weight of his words hit her like a truck smashing into a wall, and suddenly everything made horrible sense. 7 years of silence had not been just a medical mystery, or even simple cruelty. It had been a carefully orchestrated imprisonment designed to keep Leora powerless and controllable. Someone had planned this child's entire life, controlled her voice and her future and her freedom, stolen years that could never be returned, and the evil of it made Sky's stomach twist with fury. Solomon staggered forward with anger and disbelief battling across his expression like two armies fighting for control of his soul. And his voice cracked when he shouted, "You did this to her, to my daughter. You were supposed to help her, and instead you destroyed her childhood." Sky's small fingers tightened around the chip until the metal edges dug into her skin hard enough to draw tiny drops of blood, and she could feel it vibrating in response to something. Maybe Leora's emotions, or maybe its own programming, trying to reassert control now that it had been removed. She realized something extraordinary in that moment, something that changed everything she thought she knew. This wasn't just a device to control, it was a key, and removing it meant the power shifted entirely from the conspirators to the child they had tried to cage. Leora, emboldened by Sky's presence and her own newfound voice, whispered with a strength that surprised everyone, "Sky, do it now. End this." And those words carried more power than any adult command could, because they came from a child who had been silenced for too long. Sky nodded once, and with a deep breath that filled her lungs with cold night air and determination, she moved deliberately and carefully, sliding the chip completely away from Leora's reach and holding it up to the moonlight so everyone could see it clearly. In that instant, a strange warmth exploded from the device, filling Leora's ears and senses with a clarity she had never experienced before. Not just sound, but understanding. Not just hearing, but truly listening to the world around her. She gasped as the full weight of 7 years of stolen experiences came rushing back, hearing everything, the wind and the distant city and the hum of life that had been denied to her for so long. And then words came, clear and sharp and perfect, when Leora's voice trembled but held firm as she asked why. That single word directed to the doctor, carrying both fear and accusation and the demand for truth that no one could ignore. The doctor stumbled backward with disbelief etched into every line of his face, like someone had carved it there with a knife. Because the chip had betrayed him, his plan that had taken 7 years to build was crumbling into dust right before his eyes. Sky held Leora close and whispered, "It's over. You're free now, truly free for the first time in your life." But even as she spoke those words, she felt the shadows stirring beyond the rooftop, felt eyes watching them from the darkness, because the real mastermind behind everything was still out there, still watching and waiting and planning their next move, and their story was far from finished. Sky clutched Leora tightly, but her eyes scanned the shadows beyond the rooftop, because the sense of being watched crawled over her skin like insects, and the city lights shimmered far below, but they couldn't hide the feeling that someone else was out there, someone who had been controlling everything from the beginning. The chip pulsed faintly in her palm, now quiet and exhausted, as if the 7 years of imprisonment had drained something essential from it, and then a voice sliced through the night, calm and controlled and cold as winter ice. "You think it ends here," the voice said, and Sky's breath caught her throat, while Leora stiffened against her back, both of them recognizing that this was the voice of real power, real danger, the kind that didn't need to shout because it knew it had already won. From the far edge of the rooftop, a figure emerged, stepping into the weak glow of the street lamps below. And he was tall and impeccably dressed in a suit that probably cost more than most people earned in a year, carrying himself like a man who had planned every step of their lives for longer than they could imagine. "Who are you?" Solomon demanded with his voice wavering between anger and fear, the kind of fear that comes from realizing you've been a puppet dancing on strings you never knew existed. The figure smiled faintly, an expression so small it was almost invisible, and said in a voice smooth as silk, "You may call me Dr. Whitman," and his gaze fell on Leora with eyes that were piercing and calculating like a scientist examining an interesting specimen under a microscope. 7 years, he continued, 7 long years of silence. And yet she survives, she thrives, she becomes exactly what I planned her to become, and the pride in his voice was sickening because he was talking about a child like she was an experiment instead of a human being. Sky felt her stomach twist into knots because every instinct screamed that this man was dangerous in ways the others hadn't been. That Dr. Whitman wasn't just controlling the chip. He had orchestrated everything from the very beginning. Nadia and the doctor, and even the attempts to manipulate Leora's future, all of it had been his design. Leora stepped forward with her newfound confidence bolstering her tiny frame, making her seem bigger than her 7 years, and her voice trembled but rang with power when she demanded why. "Why did you do this to me? What did I ever do to you?" Whitman's eyes glinted with something that might have been amusement or might have been admiration. And he said softly, "Potential child, humans waste their potential every single day. I simply redirected yours, controlled it, shaped it into something useful instead of letting it run wild. You were inconvenient the way you were, so I made you convenient." Sky's hands clenched around Leora protectively because she had never heard anything so cruel and calculated, had never met someone who could talk about destroying a child's life like it was just a business decision. And she knew that this battle wasn't just about the chip anymore. It was about something much bigger and darker. Solomon and Marcus flanked Sky's position, but even their combined strength felt fragile against a mastermind who had manipulated their lives from behind the scenes for years, who had controlled everything they thought they knew and everyone they thought they could trust. Whitman advanced slowly and deliberately with every step a threat and every glance a warning. And Sky whispered to Leora with her voice steady despite the chaos swirling around them. "We can't let him win. Not now. Not ever. We've come too far and fought too hard to give up now." And in that moment, the rooftop became a battlefield, not just for survival, but for freedom and truth, and the life of a girl who had been silenced for far too long by people who thought they had the right to control her destiny. And the night held its breath one more time, because what happened next would shock everyone watching and change the course of everything forever. Sky's chest heaved as Whitman's calm menace radiated across the rooftop like heat from a fire, and the city below seemed impossibly distant and irrelevant compared to the storm brewing above, where everything that mattered was about to explode into violence. Whitman took a deliberate step closer with his expensive shoes clicking on the rooftop tiles, and his eyes were cold and calculating like a predator that had never once doubted it would catch its prey. "You truly think a child can defy what I've built?" He sneered with his voice low and full of cruel certainty that made Sky's blood boil with rage. "You think 7 years of careful planning can be undone in one night by a homeless girl and a broken child?" Sky tightened her grip on Leora and snapped back. "We don't care what you built. You will not control her life anymore. She's free now, and nothing you do can change that." The first move came like lightning splitting the sky. Whitman lunged with his hand outstretched, aiming for Leora's back where the chip had been, and Sky reacted on pure instinct, spinning to shield the child with her tiny body, twisting in ways that seemed impossible for someone so young and small. Leora screamed, but now her voice carried power instead of just fear, the sound echoing off the rooftop walls like a warning flare shooting into the night sky, and that scream carried 7 years of suppressed rage and pain. Solomon and Marcus joined the fight, their bodies moving to intercept Whitman, but his skill was formidable and terrifying. He parried their attacks and twisted away from their grasps. Always precise and always one step ahead, like he had rehearsed this confrontation 1,000 times in his mind. Sky realized immediately that this wasn't just an ordinary fight. This was a battle against a master strategist, a puppeteer who had orchestrated entire lives for years and knew exactly how people would move before they even thought about moving. Sky's mind raced through possibilities and strategies because brute force wasn't going to win this. They needed something else, something Whitman hadn't planned for. And then she noticed the chip in her palm, still warm from its connection to Leora, and she realized it wasn't just a relic of past torture. It was a tool, a weapon she could use against its creator. "Leora, trust me," Sky yelled over the chaos, and the girl nodded with her eyes wide but resolute, understanding without words that they were in this together until the very end. Sky shifted her weight and threw Whitman off balance for the first time since he'd appeared, just long enough to press the chip against the metal railing of the rooftop, and a pulse shot through it. Loud and piercing and unexpected, a wave of energy that made Whitman stumble backward with his hands flying to his ears. "Now," Sky yelled, and Leora moved with her small hands striking out, pushing against Whitman with all the strength her tiny body could muster, and the combination of their efforts forced him back toward the edge of the roof where the drop waited like an open grave. The rooftop trembled under their struggle. Tiles cracked and shifted beneath their feet, and wind screamed around them like the night itself was taking sides in this battle between good and evil. Sky could feel her muscles burning and her breath coming in ragged gasps. But she couldn't stop now, couldn't give up when they were so close to ending this nightmare, once and for all. Whitman's eyes blazed with fury that was almost inhuman, and Sky realized with a chill running down her spine that this battle wasn't just for Leora's voice or her freedom or even their lives. It was for the truth that could destroy a powerful empire built on lies and control and the suffering of innocent children, and the fight had only just begun. Whitman's fury erupted like a volcano that had been building pressure for years, and his face twisted in rage as the pulse from the chip rattled him, making his hands tremble for the first time in what was probably decades of perfect control. Sky seized the moment without hesitation, shoving Leora behind her and crouching low like a street fighter ready for the final round, preparing to do whatever it took to end this nightmare once and for all. The rooftop felt impossibly narrow with the wind whipping around them like invisible hands trying to push them all over the edge, and tiles cracked beneath their weight with sounds like bones breaking. Whitman lunged again with desperation replacing his earlier confidence. But Sky's instinct, honed through countless dangers on the streets where one mistake meant death, allowed her to sidestep at the last possible second. The shadow of the city below loomed enormous and terrifying, and vertigo threatened to overwhelm Sky's senses as she realized how close they all were to falling into that abyss of lights and concrete. "Stop!" Leora's small voice cut through the chaos, clear and commanding in a way that made everyone freeze. "He's lying about everything." And those words carried a weight that seemed impossible coming from someone so young. Sky froze and turned to look at Leora, really look at her, and she understood in that moment that removing the chip hadn't just given Leora back her hearing, it had unlocked something deeper, some understanding or knowledge that had been trapped along with her voice. Whitman wasn't just after control. Sky realized with horror spreading through her chest. He had been manipulating everyone, spinning lies about the family and about the chip and about the very nature of Leora's silence, creating a web of deception so complex that no one had seen the truth until this very moment. Solomon and Marcus pressed forward with renewed determination, but Whitman's strength and skill made him nearly untouchable, and Sky knew that brute force alone wasn't going to be enough to stop someone who had spent years planning every detail. She glanced at the chip in her hand, and its pulse had synchronized perfectly with Leora's heartbeat, and suddenly Sky understood something that Whitman had never anticipated. The chip wasn't just a device for control, it was a key to revealing the truth, to broadcasting evidence of everything he had done. With a quick movement, Sky pressed the chip against the metal railing one more time, and the rooftop hummed with a high-frequency vibration that filled the air like electricity before a lightning strike. And Whitman's eyes widened in horror as holographic projections erupted around them. Images and messages and recordings flooded the air, displaying confidential communications and manipulations and proof of his betrayal. Every secret he had kept hidden for years now exposed for everyone to see like ghosts rising from graves. The rooftop fell silent for a heartbeat as everyone processed what they were seeing. Years of lies unraveling in seconds. And Whitman staggered backward with realization and panic etched across his face like someone had carved them there with acid. No, he roared with his voice breaking for the first time. This isn't possible. You couldn't have known. But Sky had known, or at least her instincts had known, had felt the chip's true purpose hidden beneath its cruel exterior. And then it happened, one misstep, one tile giving way under Whitman's boot as he tried to lunge forward again, and suddenly he was teetering on the edge with his arms flailing wildly, clutching at nothing but his own arrogance and the cold night air. Sky held her breath as time seemed to slow, and she watched him fall backward into the darkness, his scream cutting off abruptly as the night swallowed him whole. The rooftop exhaled like it had been holding its breath for hours, and Leora, finally fully free from the chains that had bound her for 7 years, turned to Sky with tears streaming down her face and whispered, "You saved me. You actually saved me." Sky shook her head with her own heart pounding and her hands trembling, aware that the danger wasn't completely gone because someone else had been watching this entire time, and their plans were only beginning to unfold in ways no one could predict. Sky's chest heaved with lungs burning and heart racing like it might explode. And the fall of Whitman should have marked the end of their nightmare, but instinct screamed otherwise because someone else was out there, someone bigger and more dangerous, someone who had orchestrated every shadow and every whisper and every danger that had chased them through this endless night. Leora clung to Sky with small hands gripping tightly, and the warmth of her voice, now fully restored and clear as crystal, filled the air when she whispered, "Sky, who else is there? Who else wants to hurt us?" Sky swallowed hard because she didn't have an answer yet, but she could feel it, that crawling sensation on her skin that meant eyes were watching, calculating, planning the next move. Her gaze swept the rooftop, and then down to the streets below, where a black SUV sat motionless at the corner with its windows tinted dark as midnight, and its engine idling like a predator lying in wait for the perfect moment to strike. And then movement. 2 figures emerged from the vehicle, and they weren't ordinary people. Their posture and their precision radiated control and menace and calculation. They moved like soldiers or assassins, people who had been watching and waiting and learning everything about Sky and Leora. Solomon's face went pale as moonlight when he saw them, and his voice came out strangled when he said, "This can't be happening. Not after everything we've been through. Not after we finally got free." Sky didn't answer because words felt useless against whatever was coming. Instead, she shifted Leora behind a low wall and crouched down, scanning the area with eyes that had learned to see danger before it arrived. The chip in her palm had gone completely still now, not vibrating or pulsing anymore, but Sky understood that it wasn't just a weapon, it was a signal, and whoever these new players were, they had been monitoring the chip's energy, tracking every pulse and every moment of Leora's life, watching from the shadows as their grand plan unfolded. The taller of the 2 figures spoke with a voice that was low and smooth and chilling like ice water running down Sky's spine. "Dr. Whitman was merely the first wave. We never expected resistance. Clearly, we underestimated the child's protector." Sky's blood ran cold because that meant they knew about her, had been anticipating her every move, studying her like she was part of an equation they were solving, and the word protector hung in the air like a title she had never asked for but couldn't refuse. Leora's eyes, wide but fiery with the courage she had discovered tonight, met Sky's, and she whispered, "We have to fight them together, don't we?" And Sky nodded because what else could they do except stand and fight when running had brought them to this rooftop with nowhere left to go. Sky's small body surged with a courage that came from somewhere deep and primal. The same courage that had kept her alive on cruel streets where most children would have died. The black SUV's doors swung open wider and more figures advanced. moving through shadows like hunters closing in on prey that had nowhere left to hide, and every step they took echoed with inevitability, with the certainty that this confrontation had been planned long before tonight. Sky whispered almost under her breath, so quietly that only Leora could hear. "This ends tonight one way or another. Either we stop them or they stop us. There's no middle ground anymore." The city below seemed to hold its breath as every heartbeat became a countdown to something terrible. Every second ticking away like a bomb getting closer to detonation, and the choice between survival and annihilation hung in the balance. And as the figures lunged forward with arms reaching and weapons possibly hidden in their clothes, Sky realized with absolute certainty that the true mastermind, the one behind absolutely everything from the very beginning, had finally revealed themselves, and the rooftop became a war zone where the final battle for Leora's life and freedom would be fought. And the night had never felt darker or more dangerous or more alive with the possibility of death. The rooftop trembled under the weight of tension, so thick it felt like the air itself might crack and shatter. And Sky pressed Leora close while her eyes scanned the figures advancing from the black SUV, every instinct screaming that this was it. The moment that would decide everything, Leora's freedom and her voice and the truth that had been hidden for 7 impossibly long years. The taller figure stepped forward into a pool of light cast by the city below, and when a face became visible, Sky felt her heart stop because it was Rebecca Vance, the Billionaire family's seemingly kind-hearted aunt who had always been so loving and supportive, who had held Leora as a baby and promised to protect her forever, and yet she had orchestrated every single attempt to suppress the child's potential, controlling life and freedom and the terrible secrets of that chip. "You think you can escape what I built?" Rebecca's voice was smooth and cold and deadly like poison wrapped in honey, her words dripping with arrogance that came from years of unchallenged power. Whitman was merely the first layer. She continued with a smile that never reached her eyes. "You child were the final test, the ultimate proof that human potential could be controlled and shaped and owned like property." Leora's hands trembled, but Sky whispered fiercely into her ear, "Remember what you learned tonight. You're stronger than all of them. You have a voice now, and your words are power. They can't silence you ever again." Solomon and Marcus surged forward with rage, finally overcoming their shock. But Sky shook her head because this wasn't just a battle of strength. It was one of cunning and heart and resolve, and brute force alone wouldn't defeat someone who had spent years planning every detail. The chip pulsed faintly in Sky's palm one last time, almost like it was guiding her toward a final move she hadn't yet seen, and in a heartbeat Sky made her decision. She pressed the chip against the rooftop railing with every ounce of strength her small body possessed, and a pulse surged outward, louder and brighter than before, flashing holographic evidence of Rebecca's manipulation for everyone to see, secret plans and emails and recordings of every betrayal projected into the night sky like ghosts demanding justice. Rebecca faltered with her eyes going wide in disbelief because she had never anticipated that a small homeless girl would outsmart her, had never imagined that the chip's true power was revealing truth instead of hiding it, and the weight of exposure crushed her confidence like paper under a hammer. Leora stepped forward with her voice ringing clear and strong and commanding in a way that made even the adults pause. "Instant, no more lies, no more control. You cannot decide my life anymore, because I am free now, and you can never take that away from me again." Rebecca stumbled backward as if Leora's words had physical force, defeated not by violence, but by the power of truth finally spoken aloud. And Solomon rushed to his daughter and enveloped her in a protective embrace while tears streamed down his face. Sky's arms shook as she held the girl she had saved again and again, and tears streamed down both their faces mixing together. Tears of relief and exhaustion and joy that the nightmare was finally over. The city below seemed to exhale as the night finally released its tension, and justice had been served through the courage of a child who refused to stay silent, and a homeless girl who refused to abandon someone in need. Months later, Leora attended school with scholarships awarded and her laughter ringing through the halls, and Sky continued to protect and guide her, but now as a celebrated hero instead of an invisible street kid, and though the danger had passed, their bond promised a future filled with courage and hope and endless possibilities. The story of silence and control and power had ended, but for Sky and Leora, a new beginning had just begun, a beginning where voices mattered and truth won and love conquered evil. And as they walked hand in hand into their future, they knew that nothing could ever silence them again, because they had learned that the strongest weapon in the world wasn't money or power or control. It was the courage to speak truth even when the whole world tried to make you quiet. This ending isn't just a happy one. It's a profound lesson in courage. If this story touched your soul and you want more narratives that prove that courage and truth always win, then you're destined for this. Subscribe now and tell us in the comments what your biggest takeaway was. Thanks for watching.